She was the grandest ship ever built, a floating palace of steel and splendor, crafted in an age of boundless ambition. They called her unsinkable, a triumph of engineering and elegance, a vessel that would carry dreams across the Atlantic like no other before her. Yet within days of her maiden voyage, she would vanish beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic, leaving behind not only shattered lives, but also an eternal story that still echoes through time. This is the tale of the Titanic, not only of her tragic end, but of her creation, her voyage, and the people who stepped aboard, believing they were part of something immortal. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's somewhat comforting to imagine all of us, scattered across the globe, quietly unwinding together. So, breathe deeply, settle in, and allow the mysteries of time and memory to cradle your imagination. For in the quiet hours of the night, under the same stars that once shimmered above the great ship, the past drifts closer, patiently, quietly, like a ghost upon calm waters. Let us begin. The story of the Titanic begins not upon the open sea, but in the restless spirit of a new century. The early 1900s were an age alive with optimism, invention, and ambition, a time when steel, steam, and imagination promised to conquer the boundaries of the world. Cities glowed with electric light, locomotives thundered across vast continents, and bridges stretched across rivers with spans that seemed to defy gravity. The marvels of the industrial age whispered to people that nothing was beyond reach, and upon the waters of the North Atlantic, an invisible race was unfolding. The shipping lanes had become the highways of empires, carrying people, mail, and dreams between Europe and America. For the great shipping companies, the ocean was not just a route, it was a stage. To command the Atlantic was to command prestige, wealth, and renown. Rival companies vied with one another, not simply to deliver passengers, but to astonish them, to wrap them in luxury, and to carry them swiftly to the other side of the world. At the heart of this rivalry stood two names, Cunard and White Star. Cunard had captured the public's imagination with two leviathans, the Lusitania and the Mauretania, both long and sleek, with engines that roared like titans beneath their decks. They were not only swift, but elegant, holding the coveted blue riband for the fastest Atlantic crossing. Their success was a source of pride for Britain and an irritation to competitors. White Star Line, under the leadership of J. Bruce Ismay, knew that to reclaim prominence, it would need something remarkable. Yet, rather than chase speed, Ismay envisioned a different path, a fleet of ships that would embody not just efficiency, but majesty. One can imagine the boardrooms where these decisions were made. Heavy oak tables stretched beneath gas lamps, the air fragrant with pipe smoke and ink. Gentlemen in dark coats leaned over charts and ledgers, their fingers tracing numbers, their eyes glinting with calculation. Across the polished wood, cups of tea cooled as voices murmured of competition, prestige, and the future. There was talk of not merely matching Cunard's marvels, but surpassing them with a new kind of grandeur. This vision was brought to life in collaboration with Harland and Wolff, the great shipbuilders of Belfast. Their chief designer, Alexander Carlyle, and later Thomas Andrews, began sketching out a vessel that would dwarf anything seen before. Not one ship, but three sisters, the Olympic, the Titanic, and, to follow, the Britannic. Together, they would form a fleet of giants, floating testaments to ambition and artistry. The Titanic was conceived as more than a ship. She was to be a floating city, her decks alive with life and her interiors glowing with light. For first-class passengers, she would offer comforts beyond even the finest hotels of London or Paris. One could stroll through grand salons where chandeliers glittered like constellations, take tea in a palm court beneath glass domes, or dine upon dishes prepared by some of the most skilled chefs of the age. For those in second class, there would be elegance too, a library, a smoking room, and dining quarters fit for gentlemen and ladies of standing. Even in third class, often overlooked on other liners, Titanic's accommodations promised light, air, and cleanliness that few emigrants had ever known at sea. This commitment to comfort was matched by bold engineering. Titanic would measure more than 800 feet in length, her hull double-bottomed, her bulk divided into 16 watertight compartments, with doors that could be sealed at the push of a button. Naval architects spoke with confidence of her invulnerability, some proclaiming her to be practically unsinkable. To the men who drew her lines on paper, she was not merely a vessel, but the proof of mankind's mastery over the ocean, a symbol of progress so immense that it seemed to promise safety, certainty, and permanence. But though she existed in calculations and blueprints, the Titanic was still a dream waiting to be born. In the quiet hours of the evening, one might imagine Thomas Andrews lingering by his drawings in the Harland and Wolff offices, a lantern casting warm light over his meticulous notes. Each line he traced was both practical and poetic, transforming imagination into form. For him, as for many others, the Titanic was not yet a tragedy but a triumph in waiting, a chance to build something that would echo through history. The very idea of the ship captured imaginations far beyond Belfast. In London and New York, whispers spread of the marvel to come. Newspapers hinted at her splendour, while society's elite already began considering her maiden voyage as a fitting stage for their own presence. Even among ordinary people there was wonder. To book passage upon such a vessel was to claim a place within history, to feel, if only for a few days, a part of something larger than life. As dawn broke over Belfast each morning, the Lagan River lay calm and expectant. Across its waters, the shipyards of Harland and Wolff stood like great cathedrals of industry. Cranes towered against the sky, their arms poised as though reaching for the future. Workers passed through the gates in their thousands, boots echoing upon cobblestones, ready to turn dreams into steel. Soon, their hands would forge the Titanic into existence, hammer by hammer, rivet by rivet. But for now, she was still an idea, waiting like a shadow upon the drawing board, a promise suspended between vision and reality. And so, as this first chapter closes, let us pause in that moment of stillness before the sparks fly and the hammers fall. Picture the offices of Harland and Wolff as the city settles into night, the lamps dimming, the air heavy with the scent of ink and paper. Upon the desk lies a set of blueprints, their lines precise, their proportions perfect. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the faint whisper of waves, as though the sea itself were already calling the Titanic into being. She is not yet real, but her story has begun, quietly, patiently, upon the drawing board. The year was 1909 when work on the Titanic formally commenced at the Harland and Wolff shipyards in Belfast, a place where the clang of iron and the hiss of steam were as constant as the rhythm of the tides. Here, beneath towering cranes and against the backdrop of the river Lagan, thousands of men laboured to give form to the vision that had existed only on paper. Imagine the scene at dawn. The morning mist drifts low over the water, the shipyard silent for a moment before the gates creak open. Streams of workers pour in, their footsteps echoing across the cobblestones. Some carry lunch pails, others tools, their caps pulled low against the chill air. Slowly, the shipyard awakens, its vast frames and scaffolding silhouetted against the pale sky. And then, the silence gives way to sound. Hammers begin to strike, sparks fly from rivets, and the hum of industry fills the air like the music of progress. The construction of Titanic was unlike anything the yard had ever attempted. To accommodate her, Harland and Wolff had built a special slipway, vast in scale, reinforced to bear the weight of this giant of steel. Side by side with her sister ship Olympic, Titanic began to rise, her keel laid with ceremony, her hull stretching ever longer with each passing month. From the ground, the framework of steel seemed to grow like a mountain piece by piece, until she towered above the rooftops of Belfast. The labour itself was grueling and dangerous. Thousands of men, shipwrights, riveters, carpenters, engineers, and labourers, worked tirelessly, often in harsh conditions. Riveting gangs, made up of 4 men each, toiled in coordinated rhythm, one heating the rivets until they glowed red hot, another tossing them with tongs, a third hammering them into place, and the fourth finishing the job with a heavy sledge. The sound was deafening, the clang of metal against metal echoing through the yard, a chorus of strength and endurance. It is said that more than 3 million rivets held Titanic together, each one a testament to human effort and resolve. For the men who worked there, Titanic was more than just another contract. She was a source of pride, something that lifted Belfast into the gaze of the world. Families in the city spoke of her as though she were alive already, her progress noted day by day, her vast hull a landmark against the skyline. To children peering through the fences at the slipway, she must have seemed like a creature from another world, vast and still, yet promising to stir. Inside the shipyard, engineers and supervisors walked among the scaffolding, their voices carrying over the din. Thomas Andrews, Harland and Wolff's chief naval architect, was a familiar figure, moving quietly but attentively, checking details, speaking with workers, ensuring that every plate was set with precision. His devotion to the project was evident to all who saw him. He did not view Titanic as a mere machine, but as a living vessel, one whose strength and grace would bear the mark of every man who contributed to her. As months turned into years, Titanic's form became ever clearer. Her double-bottomed hull was fitted, her bulkheads rose like walls within a great cathedral, and her towering superstructure stretched high into the Belfast sky. Slowly, she began to resemble the dream her designers had envisioned, her vast decks laid out, her graceful bow pointed toward the horizon she would one day cross. Life in the shipyard continued in its steady rhythm. At midday, workers gathered for meals, their voices mingling with the cries of seagulls overhead. Children at home would hear stories from fathers and brothers who returned weary but proud, hands scarred by rivets, faces smudged with soot. Titanic was not simply a ship in the making. She was the heartbeat of the city, uniting thousands in the shared labor of creation. And yet, even in her unfinished state, Titanic inspired awe. Visitors to the shipyard gazed upward at her hull, astonished by her scale. She seemed impossibly vast, as though she could swallow smaller ships whole. The newspapers wrote of her with reverence, describing her as the greatest vessel the world had ever seen. For Belfast, she was both industry and identity, her rising frame a promise that their city stood at the forefront of modern achievement. By May of 1911, Titanic was ready for her launch. The slipway had carried her weight for nearly 2 years, and now the moment came to ease her into the waters of the River Lagan. On the 31st of that month, tens of thousands gathered to witness the event. The morning sun glistened on her painted hull, flags fluttered in the breeze, and the crowd buzzed with anticipation. At noon, the signals were given. With the release of the restraining mechanisms, Titanic began her slow descent. Grease and soap had been spread across the ways to ease her passage, and with immense power, she slid majestically into the water, sending waves rippling outward. There was no champagne bottle, no extravagant speeches. The launch was practical, efficient, and successful. But for those who watched, it was unforgettable. They had seen a dream born into reality, a giant of steel now afloat upon the water. For Belfast, It was a day of pride unmatched, their labours revealed to the world in the form of the largest moving object ever created by human hands. And yet, as the crowds dispersed and the great ship floated quietly at her mooring, her journey was only just beginning. The hull was in the water, but her interiors were yet unfinished. Months of work still lay ahead, fitting her engines, constructing her opulent salons, and preparing her for the voyage that would carry her name into history. As evening fell over Belfast, the shipyard quieted, the day's labours complete. The Titanic, newly baptized by the waters of the Lagan, rested in stillness, her vast bulk mirrored upon the calm river. Lanterns flickered along her decks, casting soft light upon steel that glistened like the skin of some colossal creature. The men who had built her returned to their homes, weary but filled with pride, while the ship herself seemed to wait, silent and expectant, for the next chapter of her story to unfold. With her hull complete and her engines fitted, Titanic began to transform from a shell of steel into something extraordinary, a palace upon the waves, designed to dazzle the senses and cradle passengers in comfort. By late 1911 and early 1912, teams of craftsmen, decorators, carpenters, and upholsterers poured their skill and artistry into her interiors. Each day, the vast ship grew more splendid, each corridor, each salon, each cabin slowly coming alive with detail. To step aboard Titanic in those months of preparation was to enter not a vessel, but a world. Her interiors were not merely practical spaces, but statements of opulence, designed to rival the grand hotels of Europe. The White Star Line had spared no expense, determined that their ship would surpass all others in luxury. The decorators drew inspiration from classical styles, from the grandeur of Versailles to the refinement of Edwardian taste, blending them into a vessel that was at once majestic and modern. First-class accommodations were the crown jewel. Imagine strolling into the grand staircase, where oak paneling gleamed beneath polished brass, and an ornate wrought-iron balustrade curled gracefully upward. At its heart stood a great glass dome, flooding the stairwell with daylight that glowed like soft fire through stained glass. Beneath this, a clock watched over the staircase, its carved allegorical figures of honor and glory crowning the scene. One could almost hear the hushed murmurs of first-class passengers, their footsteps echoing on the carpeted steps as they ascended into elegance. Beyond the staircase lay the first-class dining saloon, a chamber large enough to seat more than 500 guests. Its walls were clad in carved wood paneling, its ceiling adorned with plasterwork in delicate patterns, and its rows of tables gleamed with white linens, silver cutlery, and fine china. Meals here were not mere nourishment but ritual, with multi-course dinners unfolding beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Soft strains of music often accompanied the service, weaving atmosphere into indulgence. For relaxation, first-class passengers had at their disposal a veritable promenade of luxuries. The lounge, styled in the Georgian manner, featured tall windows overlooking the sea, with deep armchairs where one might read or converse. The smoking room, designed with rich mahogany and stained glass, provided a haven for gentlemen, where the scent of tobacco mingled with quiet conversation. And for those seeking health as well as leisure, Titanic offered a gymnasium with mechanical horses and rowing machines, a swimming pool filled with seawater, and Turkish baths with marble benches and aromatic vapors. She was, in every sense, a floating resort, created to pamper the body and delight the spirit. Yet, Titanic was not only for the wealthy. Her second-class accommodations were, by the standards of the day, remarkably refined. The second-class dining room, with its simple yet elegant wood paneling and comfortable seating, offered meals that rivaled the finest hotels accessible to the middle class. A library allowed passengers to read or write letters, as the Atlantic passed by outside, while the smoking room gave space for camaraderie and relaxation. For teachers, clergy, businessmen, and families of modest means, second class on Titanic offered a dignity and comfort that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. Even in third class, often neglected on other liners, Titanic provided spaces that spoke of care. Here, passengers had access to shared dining rooms rather than bringing their own provisions, a rarity at the time. Cabins, though simple, were clean and bright, with electric light and running water. There were communal areas where music and dancing lifted spirits, and where families travelling to America might gather to share hopes for new beginnings. For many of these passengers, Titanic was not only transport but transformation, carrying them toward futures filled with possibility. The contrast between the classes was striking, yet it was bound together by the ship itself, which seemed to embody a sense of harmony. From her gilded first-class suites to her sturdy third-class cabins, Titanic offered a place for everyone, a microcosm of society afloat upon the sea. The newspapers of the time called her a wonder, and even seasoned sailors admitted their astonishment at her scale and her splendor. Walking her decks, one could sense the thought that had gone into her design. Wide promenades stretched along either side of the ship, where passengers might stroll in the bracing Atlantic air, the sea unfurling endlessly to the horizon. At night, these decks were softly lit, the stars above mirrored by lamps that glowed like constellations along the railings. Inside, electric lights illuminated corridors and cabins, a marvel still new to many, their steady glow replacing the flicker of gas lamps or candles. The ship was at once a triumph of engineering and a theatre of experience, designed to astonish from the first step aboard. And yet, beneath all this splendour, Titanic's strength remained a quiet reassurance. Her watertight compartments, her double bottom, her immense bulk, all spoke of security, of safety almost beyond question. Passengers boarded with confidence, reassured by the words of experts and the aura of modernity. To them, Titanic was not only magnificent, but dependable, a vessel that embodied the certainty of progress. As the final fittings were completed, her carpets laid, her pianos tuned, and her dining sets polished, Titanic awaited her first passengers. Workers gave way to stewards and stewardesses, engineers to officers in crisp uniforms. The ship was no longer a work site, but a palace ready to receive her guests. Her rooms smelled faintly of fresh wood polish and linen, her hallways gleamed, and her decks stretched wide and silent, awaiting footsteps that would soon echo upon them. Picture her then on the eve of her maiden voyage. The docks are quiet, lanterns flickering in the cool night air. The Titanic rests at her berth, lights glowing warmly through her portholes, her funnels looming dark against the stars. Inside, her salons stand ready, her tables set, her beds prepared. She's a palace afloat, waiting like a stage before the curtain rises, her story poised to begin. The morning of April 10th, 1912, dawned cool and clear over the port of Southampton. Along the docks, a quiet anticipation filled the air, the kind that precedes the beginning of a great journey. The Titanic, her black hull gleaming, her four funnels rising proudly into the pale sky, rested at berth 44 like a giant waiting patiently to stir. The quayside was alive with activity as carriages arrived. Luggage was hauled, and passengers, dressed in their finest, gathered with family and friends to say their farewells. Picture the scene as the ship prepares to sail. Porters hurry back and forth with trunks and cases, their calls mingling with the cries of seagulls overhead. Stewards in crisp uniforms guide passengers toward the gangways, their voices calm and polite amidst the bustle. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and salt water, the twin aromas of industry and ocean. Beyond it all, the Titanic herself seems to breathe, steam rising from her funnels in lazy plumes, her decks gleaming with fresh paint. First-class passengers arrive in motorcars and horse-drawn carriages, their hats and coats proclaiming wealth and status. They ascend the gangways with quiet composure, stepping into a world prepared to indulge their every comfort. Among them are names destined to be remembered. John Jacob Astor, one of the wealthiest men in the world, travelling with his young bride. Benjamin Guggenheim, dignified in his bearing. Isidor and Ida Strauss, owners of Macy's department store in New York, whose devotion to one another would become a legend of the voyage. Second-class travellers, teachers, merchants, and families of moderate means follow with equal anticipation, guided to their cabins and already imagining the days ahead. And then the third-class passengers, their faces lit with hope, climb the gangways with children in their arms and dreams in their hearts. For them, Titanic is not merely a ship, but a promise, carrying them across the Atlantic toward new lives in America. They bring with them bundles of belongings, instruments and stories, each one adding to the living tapestry of the voyage. At noon, the order is given to cast off. Titanic's ropes fall away, and with the assistance of tugboats, the great ship begins to move. The crowd on the dock cheers and waves, handkerchiefs fluttering in the air, while those aboard wave back, leaning over the rails, their voices carrying faintly across the water. Slowly, majestically, Titanic edges away from Southampton, her engines rumbling deep within her hull, her bow turning toward the open sea. The voyage begins with a minor drama. As Titanic moves past the liner, New York, moored nearby, the smaller ship is drawn suddenly toward her by the pull of the water, displaced by Titanic's immense bulk. For a moment, it seems there may be a collision, the New York swinging dangerously close, but the quick actions of tugboats prevent disaster, and with a sigh of relief, Titanic continues on her way. To some, it is a curious omen, though quickly forgotten in the excitement of departure. Once free of the harbour, Titanic glides smoothly into the Solent, her propellers churning the water into white foam. On deck, passengers gather to watch the English coastline slip slowly away, the spires of Southampton fading into the distance. The ship vibrates gently beneath their feet, the steady heartbeat of her engines promising strength and reliability. For many, it is the beginning of a grand adventure. For others, it is the first step toward a new life. For all, it is a moment never to be forgotten. The first stop comes that very evening at Cherbourg, on the coast of France. Too large to dock directly, Titanic anchors offshore and tenders ferry passengers to and from the ship. Here, more distinguished travelers come aboard, including the American millionaire Benjamin Guggenheim and the famed fashion designer Lady Duff Gordon. As the tenders return in the fading light, Titanic's lamps glow warmly against the dusk, her vast bulk looming like a floating city against the horizon. From Cherbourg, the ship sails onward to Queenstown, now known as Cove, on the southern coast of Ireland. It is April 11, and the sea air is fresh, carrying with it the scent of salt and the cries of seabirds wheeling overhead. At this final European port, mailbags are loaded in vast numbers, for Titanic is not only a passenger liner, but also a royal mail ship, tasked with carrying correspondence across the Atlantic. Dozens of emigrants also board here, many from small Irish towns and villages, carrying little more than hope for a better future in America. For them, Titanic is both a farewell and a beginning, a bridge between the world they leave behind and the one they have yet to discover. By afternoon, the last tenders depart, and Titanic turns westward. Slowly, the green hills of Ireland fade into the distance, the last glimpse of Europe many aboard will ever see. The ship moves steadily into the open Atlantic, her prow cleaving the waves, her funnels trailing plumes of smoke that drift and dissolve into the endless sky. Behind her, the wake stretches like a silver ribbon, marking her passage across the sea. On board, life begins to settle into rhythm. Cabins are unpacked, luggage stowed, and passengers begin to explore the great ship that is to be their home for the coming days. Children dart along the promenades, their laughter mingling with the cries of gulls. Couples lean on the railings, watching the water slip by in a dance of foam and colour. In the saloons and lounges, conversations begin, acquaintances are made, and stories are shared. The Titanic, no longer merely a marvel of engineering, becomes a living world of people, voices, and dreams. As evening falls, the ship sails smoothly onward, her lamps glowing in the gathering darkness. The sea reflects her light, a shimmering path across the waves, while the first stars prick the sky above. For those on deck, wrapped in coats against the chill, it is a sight of quiet wonder, the vastness of the ocean stretching in every direction, and upon it, the most magnificent ship ever built, carrying them forward into the unknown. And so, Titanic leaves Europe behind, her voyage fully begun. The coastline has faded, the land is gone, and only the open Atlantic lies ahead. The passengers retire to their cabins, their voices hushed, their thoughts turning to the adventures of the coming days. In the stillness of night, the ship glides forward, her engines a steady heartbeat in the dark. She is at once a vessel, a palace, and a dream, her journey just beginning beneath the watchful stars. By the second day of her voyage, Titanic had settled into her rhythm, gliding across the open Atlantic with a serenity that belied her immense size. The horizon stretched endlessly in every direction, the sea shifting from deep indigo to shimmering silver as sunlight danced across its surface. Above, the sky arched clear and wide, the ship seeming small beneath the immensity of the heavens, though to those aboard she felt like a world entire, complete and secure. Life at sea aboard Titanic was a tapestry woven from countless small experiences. For first-class passengers, mornings began with breakfast served in their staterooms or in the lavish dining saloon, where stewards in white jackets moved gracefully between the tables. The menu offered a variety few could enjoy on land: fresh eggs, grilled fish, sausages, fruit, rolls, and coffee or tea prepared to perfection. Afterwards, many strolled along the promenade decks, the sea breeze cool and refreshing, their conversations drifting as softly as the waves below. In the afternoons, some gathered in the Café Parisien, a light-filled corner styled after the fashionable establishments of Paris. Here, gentlemen read newspapers while ladies sipped coffee, their hats adorned with feathers and flowers, catching the light from the tall windows. Others sought the quiet of the library or the indulgence of the Turkish baths, where warm air and marble benches offered a refuge from the brisk air outside. Children of the wealthy ran across the expansive decks, their laughter mingling with the call of gulls that still followed the ship far out to sea. In second class, life was no less pleasant, though simpler. Families sat together for hearty meals in the dining saloon, where the food was of a quality that many would have considered luxurious ashore. Teachers, merchants, and clergymen walked the decks in quieter company, reading or conversing as the ship pressed steadily westward. The smoking room offered camaraderie, while the library provided books and periodicals to pass the time. For these passengers, Titanic offered an experience beyond what many had imagined possible, a glimpse of luxury within reach. Third-class life carried a different rhythm, yet one no less filled with spirit. Here, passengers shared dormitory-style cabins, though these were cleaner and brighter than any steerage accommodation before. Communal dining rooms served wholesome meals, soups, stews, bread and tea, far superior to the provisions emigrants often had to bring for themselves on other ships. In the evenings, music and dancing enlivened the common spaces, fiddles and accordions filling the air with lively tunes. Children played together, running through the corridors, while parents spoke of the lives that awaited them across the ocean. The mood was one of hope, of beginnings, of journeys not only across water, but toward new horizons of possibility. Throughout the ship, the hum of engines was a constant presence, a deep vibration that reminded all aboard of the immense power propelling them forward. Below deck, stokers laboured tirelessly, shoveling coal into the furnaces that roared like fiery lungs. Though few passengers ever saw this hidden world, it was as much a part of Titanic's life as her grand staircase or her polished decks. The work was hot, grueling, and unrelenting, yet it was this unseen labour that kept the great ship moving smoothly through the waves. The officers and crew carried out their duties with quiet efficiency. Captain Edward Smith, experienced and respected, moved calmly among passengers, his presence reassuring. Officers maintained watch upon the bridge, their eyes scanning the horizon, their instruments measuring course and speed. Stewards and stewardesses tended to passengers with patience and care, while deckhands polished railings and kept the ship immaculate. Together, they sustained an atmosphere of order and serenity, one in which passengers could feel secure. As days passed, life aboard began to feel timeless, as though the world beyond the ship no longer existed. Meals followed one another in gentle succession, mornings flowed into afternoons, and evenings were filled with conversation, music, and games. First-class gentlemen gathered in the smoking room over brandy and cigars, while ladies retired to drawing rooms to play cards or listen to the piano. In second class, evenings might be spent strolling the decks or enjoying a quiet gathering. In third class, the air was alive with song and laughter, stories told in many languages, blending into a chorus of humanity carried across the sea. The weather remained fair, the sea calm, the days bright and cold. Ice warnings had begun to arrive by wireless, but to passengers, these were of little consequence. The ship's great size and reputation inspired confidence, and the talk on deck was of society, of destinations, of plans for when they reached America. No sense of danger disturbed the atmosphere. Instead, there was peace, a steady, almost dreamlike progression across the wide Atlantic. At night, the ship took on another beauty altogether. Her decks, softly lit by electric lamps, glowed against the darkness, while above, the sky shimmered with stars unbroken by the haze of city lights. To stand at the railing and look upward was to see the heavens unveiled, vast and endless, while beneath, the sea reflected their shimmer in dark ripples. The ship's funnels loomed against this sky, trailing faint ribbons of smoke that drifted into the cold night air. The sound of her engines softened into a steady heartbeat, and the vastness of the ocean seemed almost to cradle the ship in silence. It was during these quiet evenings that many felt a deep sense of wonder. The Titanic was not merely a vessel of steel and steam, but a floating world suspended between sea and sky. For some, it was a temporary stage of glamour and indulgence. For others, it was a bridge toward new lives. For all, it was an experience that seemed almost timeless, as if the ship were gliding not only across the ocean, but through a dream. And so, the days of the voyage passed, each one a rhythm of meals, promenades, conversations, and quiet nights beneath the stars. Few aboard could imagine that their journey would be so brief, or that history was waiting silently just beyond the horizon. For now, there was only the steady motion of the ship, the laughter of children, the glow of lamplight upon polished wood, and the endless ocean stretching calmly all around. As this chapter closes, picture yourself upon the deck in the evening air. The sea is calm, the stars above brilliant, the ship's lamps glowing softly in the darkness. You feel the vibration of the engines beneath your feet, steady and sure. Around you, voices fade into silence, and the night deepens. The Titanic sails on, serene and majestic, her passengers dreaming of the days ahead, unaware of how swiftly the course of history will change. The voyage had unfolded with such serenity that the night of April 14th seemed like any other at first glance. The day had been bright and cold, the air crisp, the sea almost unnaturally calm. As evening settled, a stillness descended upon the Atlantic. The water lay smooth as glass, reflecting the stars above with such clarity that it seemed the ship sailed not through waves, but across a mirrored sky. The temperature fell, breath misting in the air, the cold carrying a sharper edge than before, though few thought much of it. Dinner that night was a lavish affair for those in first class. The tables in the great dining saloon were set with silver and porcelain, the lamps casting a warm glow upon polished wood and white linen. Course after course was served. Oysters, consommé, salmon with hollandaise, roast duckling, and elaborate desserts. Laughter echoed among the tables as gentlemen in evening dress and ladies in silken gowns conversed, the strains of music floating softly from a nearby ensemble. For the wealthy, it was an evening of indulgence, a continuation of the pleasures that defined the voyage. Elsewhere, in second class, the mood was quieter but no less content. Families gathered over hearty meals, conversation gentle and warm, while in third class, music and dancing once again filled the common spaces. Fiddles played lively tunes, children clapped their hands, and voices lifted in song. The ship felt alive with human spirit, each class and corner resonating with its own kind of joy, unaware of the darkness waiting beyond the horizon. On the bridge, the officers kept careful watch. The wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were busy at their instruments, transmitting messages for passengers eager to connect with the world ashore. Ice warnings had come in throughout the day from other ships in the area, reporting fields of ice drifting further south than usual. These warnings were noted, but the sea ahead appeared empty, its surface glinting only with starlight. Without the usual swell of waves breaking against obstacles, the Atlantic was eerily smooth, a deceptive calm that made the night both beautiful and dangerous. As the evening deepened, passengers retired to their cabins. In first class, ladies slipped into elegant nightgowns, servants helping them prepare for bed, while men read quietly or shared a final cigar in the smoking room. In second class, books were closed, lights dimmed, and families gathered in prayer before sleep. In third class, the music faded, children grew drowsy, and voices fell silent. Across the ship, lanterns were extinguished, corridors hushed, and the vast vessel seemed to exhale, settling into the rhythm of night. Above it all stretched the sky, a brilliant tapestry of stars, sharper and brighter than many had ever seen. Without the haze of city lights, the heavens revealed their immensity. To step onto the deck was to feel suspended between two infinities, the stars above, mirrored perfectly in the sea below. It was a night of silence, beauty, and deceptive peace, the Titanic gliding onward at more than 20 knots, her engines steady, her passengers dreaming. Shortly before midnight, in the crow's nest, lookout Frederick Fleet peered into the darkness. The night was so still, the horizon so smooth, that spotting obstacles was difficult, the absence of waves breaking against them, leaving no hint of their presence. Wrapped in coats against the bitter cold, Fleet scanned the distance with straining eyes. At 11:40 p.m., a dark shape suddenly loomed ahead, an iceberg, massive and silent, rising from the black water like a mountain of ice. Fleet struck the bell 3 times, the signal for danger, and lifted the telephone to the bridge. His voice was urgent yet restrained. "Iceberg, right ahead." On the bridge, First Officer Murdoch reacted swiftly. He ordered the helm hard to starboard, and the engines reversed. The great ship began to turn, but she was vast, and her momentum immense. Seconds ticked by as the iceberg drew closer, its pale surface glistening faintly in the starlight. The bow veered, but not enough. At 11:40, with a scraping shudder that rippled through her steel frame, Titanic brushed along the iceberg's submerged edge. Ice ground against her hull, tearing open a series of plates below the waterline. To many aboard, it was little more than a tremor, a curious vibration. To those deep below, in the forward compartments, it was the sound of doom. In the first-class cabins, passengers felt a faint jolt, like the stopping of a train. Some stirred, curious, while others returned to their sleep. In third class, the noise was louder, a grinding rumble that caused confusion and unease. Stewards moved through the corridors, reassuring passengers that nothing was amiss, that the ship remained safe. Few could have imagined that in those moments, water was already rushing into the lower decks, pouring cold and relentless into compartments that had been deemed unsinkable. In the boiler rooms, the impact was more dramatic. Men shoveling coal felt the vibration as water surged in, flooding compartments with icy force. Orders rang out, bulkhead doors were closed, and pumps were engaged, but the damage was severe. 5 compartments had been breached, a wound too deep for even Titanic's mighty design to withstand. Though she had been built to survive 4, 5 was beyond her strength. The truth was grim. Her fate had been sealed. Above, the ship sailed on, her lights glowing, her passengers mostly unaware. On deck, a few curious souls gathered, gazing at the ice that had tumbled onto the forward well deck, chunks glittering in the starlight. Children played with pieces of ice, laughing in wonder. Officers and engineers moved swiftly below, their faces grim, their voices hushed. Within minutes, Captain Smith was informed of the gravity of the situation. His expression, calm yet troubled, revealed what the words meant. The great ship, the pride of the White Star Line, was doomed. And yet, for now, there was little outward sign of calamity. The Titanic sailed on beneath the stars, her decks quiet, her passengers mostly asleep. The night remained still, the sea calm, the sky brilliant with constellations. Only deep within her hull did the cold Atlantic surge, filling her forward compartments, tugging her down inch by inch into the darkness. As this chapter closes, imagine yourself standing on her deck in that moment. The air is sharp and cold, your breath rising like mist. The sea stretches silent and infinite, reflecting the starlight in a shimmer of silver. Beneath your feet, the ship glides on, steady and strong, yet wounded in ways unseen. You feel the quiet hum of her engines, unaware that history has shifted, that time itself seems to pause upon this starlit sea. In the minutes after the collision, a strange quiet lingered over the ship. Many passengers who had felt the vibration turned over in their bunks, dismissing it as some minor inconvenience of the sea. Others stepped briefly into the corridors, saw nothing alarming, and returned to their rooms. Titanic herself continued to glide through the water, her engines slowed but steady, her lights glowing warmly against the night. To the unknowing eye, there was no reason to be troubled. Below, however, the truth was far different. The icy Atlantic had torn its way into 5 compartments, and the water rushed with relentless force. Bulkhead doors had been closed, pumps engaged, and stokers worked furiously to hold back the flood, but the damage was beyond repair. As Thomas Andrews explained to Captain Smith, the mathematics of the disaster were stark. Titanic could remain afloat with 4 compartments breached, but with 5 open to the sea, she was doomed. Water would spill from one to the next, dragging her bow lower and lower until the ship could no longer resist the ocean's pull. On deck, the officers began to organize preparations. Orders were given to uncover the lifeboats, their canvas covers pulled back. Davits swung out into the night air. The chill was biting, the decks glittering with frost beneath the stars. Few passengers grasped the gravity of what was unfolding. Lifeboats were lowered simply as a precaution, they thought, while the ship remained steady beneath their feet. Titanic's immense size, Her reputation for strength inspired confidence that no disaster could truly befall her. Stewards moved through the corridors, gently urging passengers to dress warmly and come on deck. "Just a precaution," they said softly, "captain's orders." In first class, men donned dinner jackets once more, and women wrapped themselves in furs and shawls. Some brought books or jewels with them, convinced they would soon return. In second and third class, families gathered hurriedly, children bundled into coats, confusion mingling with curiosity. The idea that the ship might actually be sinking was one few could accept. By 12:30, the first lifeboats were being prepared. The crew, though trained, had never carried out such a task under the pressure of night and emergency. Titanic carried 20 lifeboats in all, more than regulations required, yet far too few for the number of souls aboard. At most, they could carry just over half of the passengers and crew, though few realized this in the moment. Even so, as the first boats touched the water, they did so half-filled, many passengers reluctant to step into them, preferring the apparent safety of the ship's vast decks. From the grand staircase, first-class passengers emerged onto the boat deck. The air was bitter, the night still calm, and the lifeboats swayed gently on their ropes. Some hesitated, unwilling to leave behind the comfort of the ship for a small craft dangling over the dark sea. Officers urged them forward, but still the first boat lowered, number 7, held only a fraction of its capacity. Women and children were given priority, while men stood back, some with patience, others with quiet unease. In third class, confusion reigned. Stewards and crew tried to guide families toward the boat deck, but the labyrinth of corridors and locked gates slowed their path. Many spoke little or no English, struggling to understand instructions shouted in haste. Mothers clutched children, fathers carried bundles of belongings, their footsteps echoing through the narrow stairwells as they tried to find their way. For some, the journey to the upper decks was long and bewildering, the minutes ticking away as water crept steadily upward below. Amidst the uncertainty, there were moments of courage and humanity. Benjamin Guggenheim, the millionaire, famously dressed once more in his evening attire, telling those nearby that he and his valet were prepared to go down like gentlemen. Isidor and Ida Strauss, elderly and devoted, refused to be separated, choosing to remain together on board, rather than part in the lifeboats. Many men stepped aside quietly, encouraging wives and children to go without them, their voices calm even as the chill deepened. As more boats were lowered, the reality of the situation began to dawn upon the passengers. From the decks, they could see the ship's bow settling lower into the water, the angle slight but undeniable. Some glanced nervously at the horizon, where the lifeboats drifted like small shadows against the vast dark sea. Still, the ship seemed immense and solid, her lights bright, her decks orderly. The contrast between appearance and reality lulled many into disbelief, even as the officers pressed them to hurry. By 1 a.m., the evacuation was fully underway. The wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, tapped out distress signals into the night, their Morse code messages racing invisibly across the Atlantic. CQD, CQD, SOS. Ships far and near received them, but the nearest, the Carpathia, lay hours away. Above, passengers continued to gather, stewards handing out life jackets, voices carrying softly in the cold air. Some prayed quietly, others whispered to loved ones, while children clung sleepily to their mothers' shoulders. The band, led by Wallace Hartley, began to play on deck. At first the tunes were lively, meant to calm and reassure, ragtime, cheerful melodies, songs that stirred familiarity. The music drifted through the night air, mingling with the creak of ropes and the splash of lifeboats meeting the sea. For many, it was a comfort, a reminder of normalcy in a night that was becoming anything but. Lifeboat after lifeboat slipped into the dark water, some half empty, others filled with women and children huddled against the cold. From their seats, passengers looked back at Titanic, her great bulk glowing with lights, her funnels trailing faint smoke, her decks still lined with people. Against the silent sea and starry sky, she seemed both eternal and fragile, a palace adrift upon eternity. By the time the clock neared 2 a.m., more than half the boats had gone. Those who remained began to sense the truth more clearly. The great ship was sinking, her bow now dipped visibly, her deck sloping, her lights flickering faintly as the Atlantic claimed her inch by inch. Yet still, the evacuation continued, with as much calm as could be mustered, voices firm but quiet, the lifeboats descending one by one into the waiting night. As this chapter closes, picture the scene from the deck of one of those boats. The oars dip softly into the water, the cold biting at your cheeks. Around you, the sea is black and still, the sky brilliant with stars, and there, looming above, Titanic glows with light, immense and majestic, her deck still alive with people. She seems eternal, and yet you know she is sinking, slowly, silently, into the depths of history. The final hours of the Titanic were a paradox of stillness, an unfolding tragedy. The sea remained calm, the night dazzling with stars, as though nature herself had chosen serenity to frame the ship's last descent. The Atlantic lay dark and endless, its surface broken only by the slow, inevitable tilt of the great liner as she surrendered inch by inch to the cold. By 2 o'clock in the morning, most of the lifeboats had already been lowered away, their silhouettes drifting like tiny islands upon the water. Those still aboard the Titanic could see them bobbing against the horizon, lanterns flickering faintly as the boats pulled slowly away. From those lifeboats, survivors looked back in awe at the sight of the ship they had just left. Titanic loomed like a floating city, her lights blazing defiantly against the night, her 4 funnels towering proudly even as the bow sank lower and lower beneath the waves. On deck, the atmosphere had changed. At first, there had been disbelief, hesitation, even a refusal to accept that the ship could be in danger. But as the tilt became undeniable, a new awareness grew. The bow was now deep in the water, the stern rising ever so slightly above the sea. The slant of the deck was gentle at first, but enough that passengers adjusted their steps as they moved. Chairs slid, loose objects rolled, and the ship's symmetry, once so perfect, now seemed broken. The band continued to play, their music drifting across the night air with haunting grace. Under Wallace Hartley's direction, the musicians had never ceased, moving from lively tunes to hymns and calmer melodies. Their notes floated over the water, reaching both those still on board and those adrift in lifeboats, a fragile sound binding all who heard it in shared memory. Survivors would later recall the strains of Nearer, My God, to Thee, though some remembered other hymns. Perhaps the truth is that the music itself became timeless, forever etched into the story of the ship's end. Captain Edward Smith moved quietly among his crew, his face solemn but calm. He gave orders with measured voice, encouraging men at their posts, urging steadiness even as the situation grew more desperate. Some say he retreated to the bridge in the final minutes, choosing to go down with his command, though his exact fate remains uncertain. His presence, though, was a reassurance, a symbol of dignity amid despair. Thomas Andrews, Titanic's designer, was also seen in those last moments. He moved through the ship without thought for himself, urging passengers to don life jackets, helping others toward the boats. He was last glimpsed in the first-class smoking room, staring silently at a painting on the wall as the water crept closer. For him, the ship was more than steel and wood. It was his creation, his responsibility, and he chose to remain with her until the end. As the clock moved toward 2:10 a.m., the bow had disappeared beneath the water. The ship's stern now rose high above the waves, her propellers glistening in the starlight, massive and still. Passengers clung to railings, gathered along the sloping decks or braced themselves against the cold night air. Lifeboats already launched looked back in stunned silence, hearing the cries and shouts of those still aboard. The sound was a mixture of voices, urgent and human, rising and falling like a great chorus upon the sea. Then came the breaking point. At 2:18 a.m., Titanic's immense frame could no longer bear the strain. Her hull split, the stern rising violently as the bow plunged downward. The sound was terrible, a groaning and tearing of steel that echoed across the water. For a moment, she seemed suspended, her lights flickering one last time against the heavens. Then, with a final roar, the stern slipped upward and then down, vanishing into the sea. The waters closed over her with a hiss and a sigh, and in the vast silence that followed, the Titanic was gone. The sudden darkness was overwhelming. Where once there had been the brilliance of electric light, there was now only the starlit sky. Where once there had been the steady heartbeat of engines, there was silence. The cries of those left in the water rose into the night, hundreds of voices calling out, desperate and fading. From the lifeboats, survivors listened, their hearts heavy, powerless to change the fate unfolding before them. Slowly, as the cold claimed its toll, those cries diminished until at last the sea lay quiet once more. For those in the lifeboats, the scene was surreal. The vast ship that had seemed unsinkable, the palace of steel and splendor, had vanished beneath the waves. In her place lay only fragments, pieces of wood, overturned chairs, and the faint glimmer of wreckage. Above, the stars remained indifferent, the night as calm as ever, the ocean serene, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The contrast was haunting, nature untroubled, humanity undone, and yet, even in that darkness, there was resilience. Passengers huddled together in the boats, comforting children, whispering prayers, wrapping shawls around the shoulders of strangers. Officers in command rowed steadily, their voices firm, guiding the small craft into the night. The band's music was gone, the lights of Titanic extinguished, but the human spirit remained, fragile yet enduring, afloat upon the cold Atlantic. As this chapter closes, imagine the silence after Titanic slipped beneath the waves. The sea is calm, the stars infinite, the cold sharp against your skin. Around you drift lifeboats, their lanterns glowing faintly, their passengers hushed and solemn. Behind you, the vast Atlantic stretches dark and endless, holding within it the great ship now gone. Above, the constellations shine as they have for millennia, watching silently as one of history's greatest stories settles into the depths. The hours that followed Titanic's disappearance were long and bitter for those who remained afloat upon the cold Atlantic. The sea lay unnervingly calm, the stars brilliant above, but within the lifeboats there was only exhaustion, grief, and silence broken by the occasional sob or whispered prayer. The cries that had filled the night after the ship sank had faded, leaving behind a stillness heavy with loss. Passengers huddled together for warmth, children cradled in weary arms, shawls and coats wrapped tight against the freezing air. The great liner was gone, and with her more than 1,000 souls had vanished into the depths. Through those dark hours, the small cluster of lifeboats drifted on the open sea. Some rowed to keep blood moving in their veins, others simply let the boats float, lanterns dimming as their fuel burned low. Officers tried to maintain order, speaking calmly, encouraging those who still had strength. Yet the cold bit deeply, and despair crept into hearts. No one knew if rescue would come, or when. Time itself seemed suspended, each minute stretching endlessly against the backdrop of an indifferent ocean. But far away, help was indeed coming. At 12:20 a.m., even as Titanic's wireless operators tapped out their desperate messages, the signals had reached the ears of another ship, the Carpathia, a Cunard liner more than 50 miles distant. Her captain, Arthur Rostron, had been roused from sleep, and upon hearing the SOS, ordered his ship turned immediately toward the coordinates. He commanded his crew with urgency and precision, calling for lifeboats to be readied, for blankets, hot drinks, and medical staff to be prepared. The Carpathia surged ahead at full speed, her boilers straining, her decks alive with activity as every man and woman aboard understood the gravity of the mission. It was just after 4 a.m. when the first faint light of dawn began to tint the eastern horizon. The stars faded, the sky softened, and the black waters took on a silvery hue. With that light came the first glimpse of salvation, the outline of the Carpathia approaching steadily, her silhouette growing clearer with each passing minute. For the survivors adrift in the lifeboats, it was a sight of indescribable relief. A ship, alive and purposeful, cutting through the morning seas to gather them from despair. As the Carpathia reached the lifeboats, ropes were lowered, crew members calling words of comfort, arms reaching out to pull the weary aboard. Survivors were lifted up from the small craft one by one. Children passed carefully into waiting hands, women helped gently, men following in solemn silence. Blankets were wrapped around shoulders, mugs of hot coffee pressed into trembling hands. Doctors tended to the weak, while others guided survivors toward the saloons where makeshift beds had been prepared. The Carpathia became not just a rescuer, but a floating refuge, a place where hope returned after a night of terror. The process was slow but steady. Lifeboat after lifeboat was brought alongside, its occupants brought aboard. Some were numb, too shocked to speak, while others wept openly. Names were asked, recorded carefully, though many could only give fragments of information, their voices breaking as they spoke of those left behind. Out of more than 2,000 souls who had begun the voyage on Titanic, only around 700 were saved. The scale of the loss became clear as the morning wore on, the emptiness of the sea around them speaking louder than any words. For those aboard Carpathia, grief mingled with relief. Survivors clung to one another, searching desperately for loved ones among the rescued, calling out names, listening for familiar voices. Some reunions brought tears of joy, while others ended in silence, the realization sinking in that their dearest had not survived. Among the crew of Carpathia too, emotions ran deep. Though they had saved hundreds, they could not help but feel the weight of the thousands they had been unable to reach. When the last lifeboat had been emptied and secured, Captain Rostron turned his ship toward New York. The voyage was somber, the decks heavy with mourning. Survivors gathered together, sharing stories, piecing together fragments of the night in hushed tones. Clergy offered prayers, while others sat in silence, staring out at the sea that had swallowed so much. The wireless transmitted lists of survivors to the world beyond, each name carrying both relief and sorrow to those awaiting news. News of the disaster spread swiftly across the globe. In New York, in London, in Paris, newspapers rushed to print editions, their headlines stark and shocking. Families crowded outside shipping offices, scanning lists, desperate for word. Churches filled with mourners, vigils held by candlelight, bells tolling in memory of the dead. The world had believed Titanic to be unsinkable, a triumph of modernity and progress. Her loss struck not only hearts but confidence, shaking the faith of an age that had placed so much trust in human achievement. On board the Carpathia, the days that followed were filled with quiet dignity. Survivors were clothed, fed, and comforted. Children played again, faint laughter returning to the decks, while adults gathered in groups, finding solace in shared grief. The crew of the Carpathia, though weary, continued to tend to them with kindness and care, their ship transformed into a sanctuary upon the ocean. By the time the Carpathia reached New York on April 18th, the tragedy had already become legend. Thousands gathered at the docks, waiting in silence as the ship approached, her decks lined with survivors, her flags at half-mast. Cameras clicked, voices hushed, and tears fell freely as the first passengers stepped ashore. Each face told a story of endurance, of heartbreak, of lives forever changed. The city, and indeed the world, opened its arms to them, even as it mourned those who would never return. As this chapter closes, imagine the quiet decks of the Carpathia at dawn, the sun rising pale over the Atlantic. Survivors, wrapped in blankets, lean against the railings, gazing back at the empty sea. Behind them lies the place where Titanic went down, a silent grave beneath calm waters. Ahead lies New York, and with it the burden of memory. The night has passed, but its shadow will linger forever. Though the Titanic sank in the early hours of April 15th, 1912, her story did not end with her descent into the Atlantic. In truth, that was only the beginning of a legacy that would echo across generations, carried in memory, myth, and meaning. The ship, once hailed as unsinkable, became a symbol of fragility, a reminder that even humanity's greatest triumphs are bound by the forces of nature and fate. In the immediate aftermath, inquiries were held on both sides of the Atlantic. In London and in Washington, witnesses gave testimony, recounting in solemn detail the events of that night. Officers spoke of orders given, passengers of moments of bravery and confusion, survivors of the chilling cries that filled the darkness. The hearings revealed shortcomings, lifeboats too few, speed too high, warnings too easily dismissed. From these revelations came change. Maritime law was rewritten, lifeboat requirements expanded, safety drills made mandatory, and international ice patrols established to guard against future tragedies. Though born of sorrow, these reforms would go on to save countless lives at sea. Yet Titanic's legacy was not only practical but deeply human. For families who had lost loved ones, the memory endured in grief and reverence. Newspapers published portraits of the dead, cities erected memorials, and vigils were held in churches across the world. The names of those who had shown courage, men who stood aside for women and children, officers who carried out their duties to the end, musicians who played until the last, were spoken with respect, their stories woven into the collective memory of the age. The Titanic became more than a ship. She became a monument to human aspiration and human vulnerability alike. As decades passed, the memory of the Titanic did not fade. Instead, it grew, nourished by books, films, and the stories handed down from survivors. Walter Lord's A Night to Remember captured the imagination of the mid-20th century, retelling the tragedy with vivid detail. Films brought her image to the screen, her decks recreated, her story retold in voices both factual and dramatic. Each generation seemed to rediscover her, finding in her tale not only tragedy, but also a reflection of their own hopes and fears. For years, the great ship herself lay hidden beneath the sea, her resting place unknown, her form imagined only in speculation. It was not until 1985 that an expedition led by Robert Ballard finally located the wreck, lying in two great sections more than 2 miles beneath the surface. Cameras revealed her to the world once more, her bow still recognizable, her deck silent and covered in silt, her windows dark, her railings twisted by time. Shoes, crockery, and personal items lay scattered across the seabed, haunting reminders of lives once lived. The images captured hearts around the globe, bringing Titanic's story into a new era. Since that discovery, expeditions have returned, capturing clearer images, mapping the wreck, and even bringing artifacts to the surface. Exhibitions have allowed people to walk among her relics: a pocket watch frozen at the time of impact, a child's shoes, fragments of the ship's ornate paneling. Each object carries with it a voice from the past, a whisper of those who once walked her decks. Yet, debates continue, whether her grave should be left undisturbed, whether she belongs to history beneath the waves rather than museums above them. Beyond the wreck, Titanic has become a cultural touchstone, her name known in every corner of the world. She stands as a symbol of human achievement and human hubris, of grandeur undone by nature's quiet strength. To some, she represents the arrogance of declaring a ship unsinkable. To others, she is a monument to courage, to music played in the dark, to lifeboats lowered under the stars. Her story is both cautionary and inspiring, reminding us that progress must always be tempered with humility. The Titanic's legacy also lives in art, in literature and in music. Poets have written of her, composers set her memory to song, and storytellers continue to return to her decks in imagination. Perhaps it is because her tale contains every element of human drama: ambition, luxury, love, loss, sacrifice, and survival. It is not only the story of a ship, but of the people who dreamed her, built her, sailed upon her, and remembered her. Even today, more than a century later, the name Titanic conjures an image instantly understood. Her story crosses borders and generations, binding together the hearts of those who hear it. She is not forgotten in Belfast, where she was built, in New York, where she was bound, or in Southampton, Queenstown, and Cherbourg, where she last touched shore. Memorials stand in those places, quiet stones and statues that speak softly of the lives entwined with her fate. And in the stillness of the deep Atlantic, she remains. 2 miles below, the Titanic rests in darkness, her bow buried in silt, her stern twisted and broken, yet her essence unmistakable. Around her, the sea is silent, her story preserved in the cold where light does not reach. She's no longer a ship of luxury, no longer a triumph of engineering, but something greater, a memory etched into time, a reminder that all human endeavor is fleeting, and yet all human stories are eternal. As this final chapter closes, imagine yourself gazing down through the dark waters where Titanic lies. Around you is silence, broken only by the slow rhythm of the ocean. Her decks are empty, her corridors still, yet her presence is immense, felt even across the century. The sea holds her, but the world remembers her. She endures not as a tragedy alone, but as a tale of humanity, of dreams and of loss, of memory and of meaning. And so, the story of the Titanic drifts to a close. From her birth in the shipyards of Belfast, to her splendor upon the seas, to her final descent beneath the cold Atlantic waves. She remains a vessel unlike any other, not only in steel and splendor, but in memory, in meaning, and in the quiet ways her story has endured through time. If you are still awake, let your thoughts fade now, like ripples spreading across calm water. Let the weight of the day dissolve, as softly as mist upon the sea. Or, if your curiosity still lingers, you might continue your journey with one of our other voyages through history. Perhaps to the pyramids of Egypt, the rise of Rome, or the mysteries of lost civilizations. Before you drift away, remember to like and subscribe, so you don't miss any of our future journeys through time. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining me on this voyage, for sharing in this story of wonder and remembrance. And now, as the night deepens and the stars look down, I leave you with this gentle wish. May rest find you softly, may dreams carry you kindly, and may sleep cradle you as tenderly as the ocean cradles the memory of the past. Until next time, sleep well.